For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates. This is Track News Global. I'm Amitabh Brevi on our weekly Talking Point show. Today we're discussing the SCO Foreign Ministerial meet in Tashkent with Ambassador Asoke Mukerji. And we'll also have, for the first time on Strat News Global, Temur Umarov. Ambassador Asoke Mukerji was India's permanent representative at the United Nations and envoy to Kazakhstan and opened several of our Central Asian missions. Good to see you again, sir.
Thank you for having me, Amitabh.
And joining us for the first time, he's joining us from Turkey. Warm welcome to Temur Umarov. He's a fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and also a fellow at the OSCE Academy in Bishkek. Good to see you, Temur.
Thank you very much for having me.
Pleasure's all ours. Ambassador, not much has come out so far as we go on air with what really happened at the SCO, except for some tweets and social media reporting there. But just looking at the reasons for, say, the original logic of the SCO and then India joining, perhaps one element then was this non-Western aspect to the... But with current geopolitics, what is it, Ambassador, do you think that India looks for at SCO meetings?
Well, I think in terms of India's interest, the SCO represents a grouping which is formal. It has a secretariat, it has a charter. India has gone through the process of applying for membership and meeting the criteria for membership. So it's an institutional framework with which India can interact with the countries of the grouping. And in that, of course, the focal interest, even when we applied in 2005, had been Central Asia and Afghanistan. But besides that, the two permanent members of the UN Security Council, Russia and China. So it gave us and gives us an opportunity to interact in a fairly predictable setting, which is important because I think that these meetings are prepared for at different levels. Right now, we are seeing the foreign ministerial level, preparing for a summit and so on. So this process is something that's very much in keeping with the traditional multilateral or plurilateral diplomatic engagement of India. In terms of the focus, I think the focus has been initially from the time it met last year on the situation in Afghanistan, which after August last year, when the Taliban took power in that country. And India, as I said earlier, perhaps on one of your programs, lost all its diplomatic presence in Afghanistan. We had to close our embassy and all the 4 consulates we had. So most countries, consider that to be a big strategic setback. And so for us, how have we fared in the 1 year after the Taliban took over in Afghanistan? What has been our engagement? What has been the engagement of the other members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization with Afghanistan? I think that's an area which is directly related to our core interests because Afghanistan is a member of the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. It is also a neighbor of India. So I think that that's the priority. But the second priority, I think, which flows out of the visit of our Prime Minister to Central Asia in 2015 July, is India's renewed engagement with Central Asia. The format of C5+1, which is mentioned by several countries, but India too has a Central Asia-India platform. And I think that that is important because we are connected, and our Prime Minister said it, others have said it, analysts have talked about it. India and Central Asia have connections which were actually separated or broken by imperial history, by the imperial history of Tsarist Russia and the British Empire. So they created the buffer of Afghanistan in between. But before that, there has been and there have been very, very dynamic linkages which have their impact in India and have their impact in Central Asia. So that this is a process of rediscovery, I think, and this meeting and the meeting that you mentioned with some of the counterparts of our foreign minister from Central Asia will play a big role in taking forward the re-engagement of India with Central Asia.
We could talk about that a little bit more in detail, Ambassador. Just Temur, what is your reading of China's objectives in the SCO, and how do you see China's footprint in Central Asia?
So, to be frank, I don't think that China sees a lot of potential in Shanghai Cooperation Organization. I think Beijing looks at it as a very important platform for discussion, for meeting countries, more than 10 countries right now in Tashkent. And Beijing sees it as a potential of, keeping its eyes on this region and being aware of what is going on inside of these countries. China also sees it as a great opportunity to meet with its closest allies. Not allies, China doesn't use this wording, but partners like Russia, like Central Asian states. But other than that, I think China doesn't see SCO as a very important or vital organization in its foreign policy. I do believe that China prefers to use bilateral instruments in reaching its own goals in different parts of Eurasia. And I also think that China prefers to use its own organizations. Like when we talk about Chinese interests in Central Asia, China prefers to use China plus 5 Central Asian states organization that it launched a couple of years ago. China also prefers to use its own platforms like Belt and Road Forum that it holds once in a while. And SCO right now has become this very, large organization that is very difficult to, to change or to bring something new to the international relations through it, because there are so many countries, and other countries are also joining SCO. And it's becoming bigger and bigger, and because of that, it's becoming, an organization that is very, slow in taking real actions. That is why I don't believe that Beijing looks at SCO as, a number one organization that it will use to reach its goals in the countries that are part of SCO.
Ambassador, as you said, this is the foreign ministerial, and they're preparing for the summit, which is supposed to be on the 15th and 16th in Samarkand. Now, if Xi Jinping goes there, it'll be his first visit, not counting Hong Kong, foreign visit after COVID. If Prime Minister Modi goes there, there's another opportunity on the sidelines for them both to meet at a time when India and China's relations are at a complete downhill.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, China-India relations in May last year, in May 2020, when the Galwan incident happened, and following that border clash went down. At the same time, I think some of the facts also point to a continuation of the relationship, and especially in the trade area, where India's trade with China has gone across $100 billion now for 2 years running. So when you have a huge trade relationship, and you have a kind of potential for political and strategic confidence building measures, it gives a certain push to meetings at different levels, at the political levels of the foreign ministers and even of the heads of state and government. And I think that that is one dimension of India's relations with China, which should be kept in mind, because India and China have already agreed and demonstrated that they do not need meetings like the United Nations or SCO or G20 for their political leaders to meet, because both sides agreed on what they call an informal summit mechanism, which has already met twice, once in Wuhan and once in Tamil Nadu in India. So the SCO summit, I would say, is an opportunity, but if they don't meet, it still would not denote a kind of a problem in the state-to-state interaction between India and China. So having said that, I think that India's sort of interaction with China is taking place at different regional and multilateral fora. For example, G20 is where India will assume the chair in December this year. We assume that the president of China will be participating in the G20, and that gives them one forum. The United Nations Security Council, India is going to be presiding in the month of December. I would be interested to see what is proposed, whether Prime Minister, who will be in the United States probably in December for the Democracy Summit, whether he would also preside over a meeting of the Security Council, and who would attend from the Chinese side. These are all diplomatic signals. But I think that that's the way to look at it, as an opportunity. But if it does not take place, it's not a big loss for the bilateral dynamics.
Temur, you mentioned that China's foreign policy relies more on its bilaterals, especially with its allies, strategic partners. Russia, of course, is the no limits partner. How do you see the China-Russia relationship vis-a-vis Central Asia? And in light of that, if you could also answer this question from one of our viewers, Matara, who says she's asking how the CIS countries, but let's talk about Central Asia. How are the Central Asian countries reacting to the Russia and Ukraine war?
Yeah, these two very big and important questions. First of all, Central Asia, we should understand that Central Asia is not top priority, neither for China nor for Russia. Russia, officially, if you open official documents like strategic, the foreign policy strategy of Russia, you would see that the near abroad is seen as a priority. But in fact, we all see that Russia spends maybe 90% of its attention to its relations with the West, and actually the war in Ukraine is also a very good example of Russia's disbalance in its foreign policy, and that is why in Central Asia both countries have very important goals that they want to secure. And they do it perfectly, but apart from that, they don't do other actions that are exceeding these goals. So number one priority for both is security. Central Asia has always been seen from both sides as this buffer zone between the borders of Russia and China, and very chaotic region with Afghanistan. And especially in August 2021, everyone understood that Afghanistan still matters, and the situation there is very, difficult to control. And it's very important to be aware that Central Asian regimes are strong enough to fight any sort of instability that might come from Afghan border. Apart from that, so the security is the foundation of relations between China and Central Asian states. And apart from that, China and Russia wants Central Asia to be on the same page when it comes to the questions of terrorism, separatism, and radicalism. And here, this is more of a focus of China, because China has a very sensitive region of Xinjiang. From the Beijing point of view, this is the region that is, very different from other parts of China, and it looks more as another entity of Central Asia, because ethnically, culturally, linguistically, it's very close to other 5 Central Asian countries. That is why for China, from the very beginning, it was very important to make sure that all of the political regimes in Central Asia are friendly regimes, and they will not be supporting any kind of separatism in Xinjiang, and will be eager to cooperate with Beijing and not try to destabilize a situation there.
Sure. I know you made the point that any kind of bilateral issues that India has, whether it's with China or anybody else, can be dealt with, don't have to be dealt in multilateral fora. We have other opportunities, but you mentioned G20, where Wang met Jaishankar. There were statements issued by both sides. I'm still not certain whether they have met, because neither of the sides have put out from Tashkent. I'm pretty certain there was no meeting with Bilawal. But what do you think that happens on the sidelines in terms of these two important bilateral relations, India, Pakistan, India, China, and the signals that are being sent by meeting, not meeting, whatever statements come out?
Yeah. Well, I think that diplomatic signaling is very important, and whether they meet, that's a signal, but whether they don't meet, that also is a signal. And in terms of the relationships between China, Pakistan, and China, India, and Pakistan, India, I think one issue which probably is on the front burner at the moment is the attempt to integrate the Wakhan corridor as part of the China-Pakistan economic corridor, because India has a very clear articulated view on the fact that the territory used by the China-Pakistan economic corridor is legally territory of India as part of the state of Jammu and Kashmir. So adding Wakhan corridor to this is a complication, which also impacts on India's position on the CPEC. And I think that that's something that will be at the back of the minds of people when they see the engagement between India and China, and India and Pakistan, because India-China differences over the Belt and Road Initiative are publicly known. And of that, the CPEC is probably the key, because India, in other areas of the world, India may not have the same approach on the BRI as India has on the CPEC, which is a major component of the Belt and Road Initiative. So this is something that I think needs to be looked at. And the other thing that needs to be looked at is the relationship between the new government in Pakistan and China, because many of us who have followed this in the past year or 2 years have noted the relationship between the government of Prime Minister Imran Khan and China. And now that you have Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif in power in Pakistan, what will be the equation between the two countries in which the military of Pakistan and the military of China play a very critical role? So I think that that's something that needs to be seen, because there's a lot of history to the background of Nawaz Sharif and the Pakistan army and so on, which I don't have to go into today, but that feeds into any analysis of the India, Pakistan, China trilateral interaction, even in the Shanghai ministerial meeting. So that's something that has to be seen. But one point that I think is important for what Temur mentioned about Central Asia and its interest is that Central Asia and some states in Central Asia is a landlocked region. And Central Asia needs access, which means it needs connectivity. And I think that issue of connectivity is very important also for India, because if you look at the map, the east-west connectivity doesn't really make Central Asia go straight to Shanghai. I mean, there's a lot of ground to cover that way, and there's similarly a lot of ground to cover towards the Turkish side. So for Central Asia, it's the southern part, which is closer to the ports of the Indian Ocean, including the Gulf ports. And I think that's why this meeting of the SCO and the summit in September will be important in terms of focusing on the aspirations and the interests of Central Asia in connecting with the outside world through the shortest and most effective routes. And that's where right now I think the discussions I've assumed a very interesting character, especially with the initiative taken by Uzbekistan to open a rail link to Karachi. So that's the kind of perspective which I think we need to keep in mind.
We'll talk about that a little bit more. Temur, Matara, thanks you for your last answer. But if you just want to again go over what, I know it's absurd to say, what does Central Asia think about the war in Russia and Ukraine? There's so many five different countries there with different options. But if you want to talk a little bit about the war in Ukraine and how do countries in Central Asia look at China within their own area?
Yes, actually, the war in Ukraine is a very important question. And as you rightly said, 5 countries are different. But the one thing that unites all of them is their dependency on Russia in many different terms, in economic terms, in logistical terms, in security terms. And that is why when Russia becomes this geopolitical opposition to the whole world and becomes very isolated, it affects Central Asia in all of the dimensions, from political to security and economics. Actually, if you take a look at the foreign policy history of Central Asia, you would see that what these countries have been doing for the last 3 decades of their existence as an independent state is they're trying to diversify their ties with the world and to move away from a dominant position of Moscow in the region, because during the Soviet times, Moscow had everything connected to Russia. All of the logistics, all of the diplomatic relations were, and even the relations in education sphere. All of these connections with the world, Central Asia had through Moscow, and that is why Central Asia is kind of driving away from Russia. And every single crisis that Moscow has with the West adds fuel to this process. Central Asia looks at other partners that can replace Russia in many different spheres. And China here comes as a number one country that comes to mind when Central Asia thinks about diversification, because as well as Russia, China is right here, has a massive border with 3 Central Asian countries. And China right now is the second biggest economy in the world and has so much to offer to Central Asian countries. And most importantly, China has interest in investing, in building rapport, in making sure that political regimes in Central Asia are friendly regimes, and that whenever China wants something from them, it can reach this agreement with the Central Asian countries. And that is why when it comes to this Russia-China dimension in Central Asia, in the long term, I do believe that we will see a lot of replacement in the spheres that are dominated right now by Moscow, Beijing would come. But at this moment, there is still many questions where Russia is still very dominant, and this is the problem for Central Asia when it comes to the unprecedented isolation of Russia from the world.
You've already answered 2 or 3 questions, including one that I just put on the screen with Kurt Cobain, saying, could tensions exist between China and Russia in the future, owing to increasing Chinese influence in Central Asia, which Russia perhaps considers as its backyard, or even more than that. So thanks for that. But Ambassador, you talked several times about Afghanistan and how since 15th of August last year, now we have our diplomats back there. We call it a technical team. But again, the signaling that is being done, if we are engaging with the Taliban, here's another opportunity for the foreign minister to, on the sidelines, say, meet the acting foreign minister, Muttaqi. But to my best of my knowledge, and my sources are saying that will not happen. So what are we doing vis-a-vis Afghanistan? Your opinion on that, Ambassador?
Well, I think that the trigger for India's re-engagement with Afghanistan, despite in spite of who's in the regime, it came because of the humanitarian crisis. I mean, if you remember late last year, when winter came, there was a global sort of concern on the terrible situation facing literally tens of millions of Afghans, because they didn't have food, they didn't have enough heating, and so on. So it was in that context that India's re-engagement with Afghanistan took place, with humanitarian supplies, wheat, medicines, and so on. And I think that that's the key, because the engagement is with the people, and using the United Nations presence in Afghanistan as the conduit, as the platform through which Indian humanitarian assistance is reaching the Afghan people. The recent interaction, including the official visit to Kabul of the head of the Department of the Foreign Office in India, shows that now there is an attempt to see whether this can be expanded beyond humanitarian assistance. And this is the big challenge, because if you look at the track record of India and Afghanistan after the 9/11 attacks and after 2001, India's calling card in Afghanistan is really development assistance. And in that development assistance, there are 3 components. One is the infrastructure. I mean, the parliament building in Kabul, or the electricity transmission from to Kabul, and so on. And the Salma Dam. But the other 2 priorities have been education and health. And in both education and health, there has been a priority of self-employment, of empowerment of Afghans to take their own lives and their own futures in their own hands. That's the Indian model of development. So it's not that Indian consultants will go on and stay there forever. I mean, they will come. They have come back, and that's how India has developed this development partnership with Afghanistan. In that context, women have played a very important role. So this is the test for India, and it's also the test for the Taliban. Because if they want India to be the same kind of development partner that India has been till August last year, then will they find a way to bring the partners that India had partnered, who are the women of Afghanistan in these fields of health and education, back into the process? And I think this is really the most important question that we have to look at, because otherwise, half the population of Afghanistan is now voiceless and is almost unseen. That's the women. 20 million out of 40 million are not visible. And I think that that's the important point for India, because like we hear about the crisis in Ukraine and so on, but the 2 countries have the same kind of population, 40 million in Ukraine and 40 million in Afghanistan. But when 20 million Afghans don't have their human rights upheld, the women, nobody seems to be talking about it anymore. And so will India therefore walk the talk using development assistance for the continued role of women in Afghanistan as equal partners in this process. For me, that is a critical test.
Temur, you talked about China and the fears in Xinjiang. Each of the countries in the SCO and the region have issues with what's happening in Afghanistan. But how are they dealing with it? There has been a considerable amount of criticism in the sense of whether it's realpolitik or not, that as long as terrorism is not affecting the Central Asian countries, and we saw some kind of rocket attacks across the Uzbek border and things like that, they would not do what Ambassador Mukerji is saying, which is walk the talk vis-a-vis women, vis-a-vis the youth, vis-a-vis the minorities. How do countries in that region really look at Afghanistan?
Yes, that's a very important question. And here we should understand also that, Central Asia has always been seen as this, a very weak region that could even fail if Afghanistan would blow up and things like that. But we're almost leaving a year with the Taliban in power in Kabul, and for this point, we see that Central Asian regimes are stable, and they're actually succeeding in reaching some kind of agreement with the Taliban. Of course, there are some problems, as you said, in Termes. A couple of weeks ago, there were incident of 5 rockets coming from Afghan border. And also in April, there was another attempt from the Afghan side to attack Uzbekistan. But even in these circumstances, Uzbekistan shows that it is a leading country when it comes to resolvement of Afghan question in long term. Uzbekistan actually a couple of days ago held another international conference on Afghanistan, having representative of 30 countries coming to Tashkent and meeting with the Taliban representatives. And Uzbekistan's approach actually very different from other Central Asians or from both Russia and China, because Uzbekistan doesn't see Afghanistan as an outsider. Uzbekistan wants to integrate Afghanistan into Central Asia. Uzbekistan says that Afghanistan is a part of the region, and it should be part of the region not only kind of symbolically, but also economically, politically, and security-wise. It should be integrated into trade relations, infrastructure, and stuff like that. So right now, Uzbekistan is leading this process. Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan are also joining, and Turkmenistan as well, joining Uzbekistan in this. And we also see horizontal ties that are happening between different regions, not only the central power in Afghanistan and Uzbekistan are cooperating. Also, the regional representatives meet and developing horizontal ties between these two countries. But it's very different from what Russia and China think about Afghanistan. These two big powers want chaos in Afghanistan to stay inside Afghanistan. They don't care too much about the diversity, about the inclusivity of the government, to be honest. They really want the instability not to cross the border and to come to other countries and these themselves as well. That is why their approach is very different. But from the outside, it looks similar. And the only country that takes a dramatically different position towards Afghanistan is Tajikistan, which does not want to communicate with the Taliban at all. But in reality, we also see that some sort of negotiation, some sort of communication is going on in Tajikistan, because if you take a look at the export of Tajikistan, export of electricity, is still going on. I mean, Taliban has been in power for already a year, but Tajikistan is very brutal and very tough in words, in rhetoric, but in reality, it still exports electricity. It still has some sort of unofficial connections with the current political regime in Afghanistan, and still actually shares the same goals as other Central Asian countries.
Ambassador, you talked about connectivity, and you were mentioning the rail line. There has been marginal movement in the INSSTC in terms of from Russia through Iran, through Chabahar to India trade. How do you see that developing? There has been some movement in terms of a trilateral with Uzbekistan and Iran as well. But in terms of connectivity,
yeah, well, in terms of connectivity, the key question is the volumes and of course the value of the cargo that's moved. Because if the shorter time frame is one point, the other point is also whether it's profitable to move goods and how I mean, and without adding more costs during the transit of these goods through the north-south corridor. So I think that's where the focus is. But in terms of, I think it's not an either-or option. There is east-west connectivity, which most people know of, which has been driven by China. In fact, bypassing Russia, it has gone right through Central Asia to Europe and connected China with Europe. So that has brought Central Asia into the picture. Now, how do you bring Afghanistan into that picture? I think that will depend on the future of the Uzbek-Pakistan railroad project, which is through Karachi, and whether that connects Afghanistan to the east-west alignment, which goes through Central Asia. So that's one option. But the option of the north-south transport corridor is not dependent on the failure or success of that option. That north-south transport corridor is driven by the Red Sea channel of maritime transport. The intention was to shorten transport between Asia and Europe, which currently goes through the Red Sea, and provide an alternative of using the north-south corridor, of which the two endpoints were really Singapore on one end and Helsinki on the other end. That is the plan of the north-south corridor. So to provide the value and volume to the north-south corridor, it was realized quite early on that just leaving it to Iran, Russia, and India was not going to fill up the north-south transport corridor with goods. So you had the Ashgabat Agreement a few years ago, which brought in the key Central Asian states, Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan. They are part of the Ashgabat. That decision to use this north-south trade linkage as well. And of course, the Chabahar project, which is supported by Iran, and which also brings Afghanistan into the north-south alignment. So when you have a set of countries which add volume and value to the cargo, now for this connectivity to bring in the Gulf states is the next major objective. Because if you bring in the United Arab Emirates, which is likely to be the next partner, then you really change the dynamics of the north-south transport corridor completely. And the rapprochement going on, or the contacts going on between Iran and the United Arab Emirates do seem to indicate that there is a realization that this is something in which the United Arab Emirates will also be happy to invest in. And being one of the major re-export centers of the world, the United Arab Emirates brings a huge value to this whole issue of adding substance to the north-south transport corridor. And I think that's the context in which I would see it, and in which I would also see India-UAE strategic partnership. We are using the United Arab Emirates as a strategic partner for many reasons, but one of them is connectivity and trade.
Temur, what's the substance of relations with Iran? And a last question on connectivity. I mean, as Ambassador said, it's not an either or. I mean, you have China there with investment, you have the BRI, you have other options as well. Your thoughts on connectivity in Central Asia?
Yes, all Central Asian countries. Actually, the core in success of the foreign policies of Central Asia lies in diversification, and they really don't want to be stuck between Russia and China. They want to have as more partners as possible, and because of that, Iran comes, as a very interesting and promising partner that can allow to have another way of, at least logistically, of trade for all Central Asian countries. And we've seen how different countries have been meeting with the leadership of Iran. Recently, there were meetings between Turkmenistan leaders, the Kazakhstan, and also Uzbekistan. It is a very dimension of foreign policy of all Central Asian countries that we should follow. But again, Tajikistan here is on different kind of side of cooperation with Iran, because Tajikistan in Central Asia is the only country that is Persian-speaking country, and culturally and linguistically it's closer to Iran, and that is why it adds kind of more energy to this relationship. And last year, Tajikistan and Iran signed an agreement that had security sphere cooperation in it. Again, we see that even though Iran is also isolated, even though Iran also has many different problems with the West, for Central Asia, it's another way out of this landlocked geography. And because of that, also apart from Iran, we also see much more cooperation between Central Asia and many different countries around the world, starting from Japan in Asia, and with all European countries and Israel. So Central Asia is open to cooperating with every single country, and here Iran is not an exception.
Temur, Umarov, thank you so much for giving us all your time and expertise, and we'll keep coming back to you for fascinating conversations like this on your areas of expertise.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure.
And Ambassador Mukerji, as always, thank you for your time and valuable experience.
Thank you, Amitabh. Great pleasure to be with you.
Just a reminder to our viewers, you can join our Telegram channel. We have a scroll going at the bottom of our screen, which will help you do that. That'll give you all the latest news and analysis, whether it's on our website or our YouTube channel. As soon as we put it up, you can also support us. The UPI code that went up there, QR code, or there is a link in the YouTube descriptor. This is Talking Point on Strat News Global. I'm Amitabh Brevi.